Buenos días a todos.
Good morning,
todas.
everyone.
Al webinar de la
webinar,
comunidad de práctica basada en adaptación basada en ecosistemas.
practical community based on ecosystem.
¿Pueden indicar si pueden
Can
escuchar
you
bien?
tell me if you can hear me? Can you hear me?
Ya. Bueno,
Well,
bienvenidos a todos y a todas a
all
nuestro webinar.
to our webinar.
Nuestro webinar forma
Our
parte
webinar
del
is
módulo
part of the module
17
16
sobre el enfoque de género y adaptación basada en
on gender
ecosistemas.
approach and
Mi
ecosystem-based
nombre es
adaptation. My name is
Ilieva
Lili Ilieva,
y
and
soy la moderadora
I'm the
del
moderator of
webinar
this
para hoy
webinar.
y formo parte de
And
soluciones prácticas
part
en
of
Perú
Practical
y
Solutions
soy
in Peru,
experta en
and I'm
cambio
an
climático
expert
con
in
especialización
climate
a
change and
adaptación
specification
basada en ecosistemas. Es
ecosystem-based
un gusto
adaptation.
de
I'm
moderar
very
el módulo
pleased that I can
que tiene
moderate this
objetivos de presentar
webinar,
conceptos, prácticas y experiencias
which
en la
objectives
integración
are
del
to
enfoque de género en medidas de adaptación basada en
provide objectives
ecosistemas.
and goals based on
Voy
ecosystem-based
a empezar
adaptation.
con algunas
I start with
indicaciones
some
técnicas
technical
sobre la plataforma del
instructions
webinar.
on
Entonces,
this webinar.
pueden
So
elegir el
you can
idioma
select
a
your
escuchar en el
language
botón inferior de la
in the
pantalla.
button
Entonces, pueden
below
elegir
on your
entre
screen. So
español
you can
o
select
inglés.
English or Spanish.
Las preguntas se realizarán después de
Questions
cada presentación
will
vía
be
chat.
done after each
Y
presentation
estas están traducidas
via chat,
directamente
and they will be translated,
y serán respondidas por
and they
cada
will be
presentador.
responded by
Si tienen
each
algún
presenter.
problema
If you have any
técnico, por favor,
question,
darle un
any
clic al signo
technical
de
problem, you can
interrogación
go to the
que se
question mark,
encuentra en la
click
esquina
on the question
inferior
mark below
izquierda de la
on your
pantalla.
left.
El equipo técnico de VoiceBoxer
The
les
VoiceBoxer
apoyará.
technical team will
Y
support you.
si es que
And
la pantalla se
if
congela
the
o el
screen
audio se
freezes
corta,
or
por
the
favor,
audio
regrese a la
breaks,
página.
please refresh your
Bueno,
webpage.
entonces, podemos empezar. Tenemos el placer
Can we
de
start?
presentarle a cuatro
Let me
ponentes.
introduce you four
Con nosotros
speakers.
está Annette Palgren.
Annette
Ella es
Palgren,
oficial de género
she's
y medio ambiente en la Oficina Regional de Medio Ambiente de las Naciones Unidas en Asia
part of the
y el
United
Pacífico y se
Nations.
conecta desde Bangkok. Tenemos la doctora Patricia Caso, la directora de Vulnerabilidad y Adaptación Ecológica del Instituto Nacional de Ecología y Cambio Climático en México, y también su colega Patricia Aranar.
Respecting gender. Well, we also have Patricia Carrillo. She's a specialist in gender and Director of General Office Cross-Cutting in Gender in Ministry of Women and Vulnerable Populations in Peru. It is a pleasure to present to you to Annette. Annette Valgren is a Officer of Gender in the United Nations for Asia and the Pacific in Bangkok. The integration of gender perspectives is cross-cutting for United Nations, and Annette supports the team in capacity building, design of projects with a gender focus, and she helps the link between gender and environment. Among other gender initiatives within the regional office, Annette has conducted a gender vulnerability assessment in Myanmar as part of the Myanmar Climate Change Alliance and strengthened the gender perspective within the National Adaptation Plans support program. Prior to joining the United Nations Environment, Annette has been working for UN Women and Research Institutes on matters related to gender and development. And now it is a pleasure for me to give the floor to Annette. And please wait a few seconds for her to connect.
Hi. Hi, my name is Annette Valgren. I'm very happy to be one of the presenters here tonight in Bangkok, I have to say. I know it's a different time over there, so good morning to you. So I'm working as a Gender and Environment Officer at UN Environment, or UNEP, as we also call it, regional office in Asia and Pacific. So we're based in Bangkok, but we cover the whole region of 41 countries. Just to give you a brief introduction to UN Environment, we have 7 different sub-programs, whereas one of those are on climate change. Also, another is on biodiversity, chemicals and waste, environmental law. We work on many different areas and in many different countries. So, as a Gender and Environment Officer, my role is broad. I'm working cross-cutting within all different programs, and I've been fortunate to be working a lot with the climate change and EBA team. So today I will share a bit of those experiences and also the specific guidance and tools that we started to use in supporting our staff. So first of all, I would like to switch this picture. Okay, we're moving a bit too fast now. So, first of all, our approach to mainstream gender at UN Environment and at all the other UN agencies as well, there's certain policies and standards that we have to follow. So globally, UN Environment have a gender policy, but what we've done in the regional office is to take that down to a more context-specific level. What does gender mean to us in our office, and how can we make it practical? So we're working in a 3-folded manner. First, on capacity development of my colleagues and of our staff to raise gender awareness so they can address it within their own program of work. And we've done this through guidelines, training, consultations. We also developed a gender action plan. And then, of course, we are integrating gender within our projects and activities. So whatever we do, we always keep a gender lens on. And also we facilitate the dialogue in different events, as we are a lot in events and meetings and conferences, and often we host it as well. Perspective. The toolkit that I mentioned, it's been a very useful source for us to, as I said, make it more practical and supporting staff. How do I mainstream gender within my area of work? Often what I found is that my colleagues see it as very theoretical and abstract. They don't always relate and understand what gender means in the area of climate change and adaptation, for example. So we saw quite early that we needed to have a step-by-step tool for the staff. So, for example, in terms of projects, we outlined 5 important steps for a gender-responsive project. First of all, a gender analysis, so going through examples of what that means, and also how to include gender in project preparation and design, who to involve, for example. Also on project implementation. When we're then doing the project, what do we need to think about? Very practical and easy to use guidance. And then, of course, what we always talk about, gender-responsive budgeting. What is that, and how can that relate to climate change adaptation program officer? And of course, how to monitor, how to evaluate gender components in our projects. And we also look into not only projects, but our communications outreach when we're developing material, when we're hosting or taking part of conferences, workshops, etc. Of course, also a lot of our work is related to SDGs, as for many others. So how can we SDGs and the gender and environment linkages there? So this is just a snapshot of our gender action plan. This was developed jointly with the staff to also create a certain ownership, to feel that we're all developing this together and we have certain actions we want to deliver and certain targets responsible for this. And for most of the targets, it's everyone. And we make sure we monitor the action plan twice a year and make sure that we deliver on the actions we agreed. So this creates a certain ownership of the office, and not only we should mainstream is going to do that, and in what way. So just a quick example. So now moving on to some of the experiences we have so far. Many of the activities is quite new, but we're definitely increasing our work on this. So some of our gender responsive climate change adaptation and EBA projects from our region. So in Myanmar, as part of the Myanmar Climate Change Alliance, an adaptation program jointly done by UN Environment and UN Habitat. This program was in the phase of doing vulnerability assessment in the communities in the delta area of Myanmar, but also in the dry area. So we decided to also capture the gender dimension here. What's the different perspectives of men and women? And we asked them separately in community consultations. And of course, this was highly interesting because the findings and the answers was quite different. So we asked, what does climate change mean to you? Are you experiencing any differences now than 20 years ago? And also, what impact does that have on your livelihood? Hazards you experience in terms of flooding, drought, cyclones? And yes, so the findings were really different. And for example, one thing I can share was that women, to a larger extent, are taking new and quite innovative measures. They're taking on new additional income and entrepreneurship. So these different findings from the community consultations was then laying the ground for the support that we're giving to the government of Myanmar in addressing gender and gender-related action points in the Myanmar climate change strategy and action plan. So from the very community level, we were then able to extract some of the interesting findings up to the policy level of the government and the planning they're doing starting this year until 2030. Also, we, of course, are planning our interventions as part of this program, ensuring integrated gender-responsive actions. Another experience we have quite recent, in October last month, in Sri Lanka, we did, as part of the National Adaptation Plan's global support program, we also included the gender perspective. As many of you might know, it's already outlined in the very objective of National Adaptation Plan. So how do we then apply this? So we had a presentation and capacity development, and the different countries that was represented from all over Asia and also Pacific get to discuss then what is your experiences facing in terms of gender sensitive adaptation planning. So this was representatives from environment, climate change ministries and finance ministries. And it was very clear that there's a lack of capacity in this aspect. And some of the challenges they raised was a lack of awareness. It's a sensitive subject to certain countries in our region, I have to admit. And also in terms of including gender throughout the process, it's one thing to make community consultations and vulnerability assessments, but also then how to ensure we capture that component and use it all the way through the process into the national planning. Countries also shared experience, the positive experience they have on how to coordinate planning together with national gender equality strategies and plan, invite women's ministries, or also, of course, consulting women's groups. So this was a really interesting outcome, and is again coming back to what I started with, is that many they don't have the tools and maybe the understanding and lacking some of the awareness, how to make it practical, how to ensure we do it within our planning and in what way. So they are wanting more support and guidance on this. Then I'll share with you another example. So it's in terms of project planning and preparation. This is a project that's starting up in 5 countries in our region, building climate resilience of urban systems through ecosystem-based. Also to show you the importance of planning your gender perspective and inclusion early on, in the early onset of project development, to ensure you capture it and you follow through the whole way of implementation. So this project is out. It's going to conduct gender research in each of the countries. Of course, even though this is countries like Cambodia and Laos, which can be quite similar, it still needs to be doing. Okay, I'm going to have a little pause. Okay, so for the gender analysis, it's going to include each country and also region to ensure that we have a better understanding of the context. So, for example, look into the different policies in the country, the national policies, both in terms of climate change. Does the policies in the countries refer to gender or the roles of men and women? Or does the gender equality national policies refer to climate change? And also when it comes to preparation and design, the project staked out the inclusion of stakeholders that include a gender perspective and also identify their role. So here For example, it's Department of Women's Affairs, also other actors and NGOs in the countries that have experience in gender. And also in terms of project implementation, it's highly important to then say, okay, how are we then going to do this? So for this project, it's going to be recruitment of national socioeconomic and gender experts within each country to ensure that gender sensitivity is included in training topics, ensuring that training staff has skills and experience on gender sensitive training. Also, it quite clearly states that female participants that are part of the training should be empowered to participate in trainings. So it's a strong view on ensuring that everyone get included in the trainings as part of this project. And also, of course, as you notice, this is the 5 steps that I initially talked about in terms of including gender in the project preparation and design. So now we're going to the gender budgeting. And of course, it's very important that it's stated how are the funding going to be allocated in terms of gender. So here it's for these national socioeconomic and the gender experts. They're already covered in the budget. And of course, again, monitoring and evaluating. It's already planned in the beginning, specific indicators, gender disaggregated. It's also a recruitment of monitor and evaluation specialists that will monitor the application throughout the process. And this is also very important to ensure that we're not doing harm with our intervention, to ensure that we are following the process well, and that the benefits of the project is equally among men and women. Sorry, here we go. So this was some of our experiences from Asia Pacific related to adaptation. As I mentioned, we're working on many different areas, but some further reading for you related to the UN and to our different tools we have is the UNFCCC and their guidelines or other tools for integrating gender considerations into climate change related activities under the convention. This one is actually quite good, and it guides you through the different steps, and a lot of our toolkit has been taken from these guidelines. Also, have a look at LDC expert groups that also published this year, I think, a strengthening gender consideration in least developed countries. And also, of course, have a look at the Convention on Biological Diversity. It's very strong in its gender languages and creates a certain mandate to work with this. And I also want to end with something that's supporting me a lot in my work as a gender environment officer. A lot of the different climate funds lately have strengthening their requirements for gender considerations. So, for example, the Green Climate Fund and also GEF, Global Environment Facility, and a lot of other donors in the global level, country, for example, they are now more and more looking for the linkages between gender and climate change. So with that, I would like to thank for this opportunity. And please, some questions will come up now, but also feel free to contact me if you would like to know more, or have some questions, or want to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annette. It was quite interesting to learn about the methodology of making the cross-cutting focus, cross-cutting environment and specific projects, and to see how it was transferred the gender in the development of National Plan of Adaptation. Now we have 10 minutes for questions and discussions. So all participants can come to please write your questions on the chat, where questions are going to be translated into Spanish or English. Thank you.
Now I pass the. Now Alex can they may ask.
Okay, I just got a question here about, yes, of course, I'll start with that question. I think you're referring to my example from Myanmar. So, as I mentioned, when we asked them first together in a group, both men and women, we asked, what does women work with and what does men work with? The answer was, no, women doesn't work. Men works as fishermen or as farmers. When we then asked the women separately, what do you do during the day? We found very interesting results. Let's see if this follows my translation here. All good. So the women answered that during the day they take care of gardens. They plant different vegetables. They sell it, then go to the market and sell it. Also, they run small businesses in their communities through the different small-scale entrepreneurship they're doing. And they explain that this is something they started to do recently. As we've seen in Myanmar, the fish is reduced. The farming doesn't get as many crops a year as it used to, due to salt and due to also floods and also drought. And more common with cyclones. So what the women do is, first of all, the gardening and the vegetables, and they're making food and selling. Also, they're more involved in going to the marketplaces and sewing, making clothes. Many women also go to the different factories and work. But when we asked when they're not working, of course, another very important factor, I don't know how it is in your region, but here it's often that women are not recognized for their contribution to the agriculture sector and to the fisheries. In terms of fishery sector, they are the ones making the nets. They are the ones cleaning the fish. They are the ones selling the fish. So they're basically doing anything but being on the boat fishing. And also in terms of farming, they are also involved in various different stages of the farming. So on top of the ordinary work that they always do, together with their families and their husbands, they're also involved in new innovative entrepreneurships to a new extent than they were 10 years ago. So I hope that gives you a bit more about this question. And then we had one question on methods, mainstreamed. Here's a question from Rocio. I think maybe the translation has not captured everything, but there's a question on methods to mainstream gender in countries and also regional governments. In case of Peru, would be very important. There will be some technical help to implement it locally. Perhaps I can get a clarification about that question. Maybe that was related to the government and the policy making in terms of climate adaptation plans. So this is again something that all countries need to do as part of different climate change policies. So of course there's many different tools and support on how to do this, and I'm sure also your office, UN Environment in your region, can provide you with more information on this. And then I have a question here on what are the main resistance it faces in the process of awareness and build capacity for gender mainstreaming at UNEP. That is a very interesting one. I have to admit that when I started in January this year, I didn't know what to expect, because UN Environment is a very consists of a lot of scientists with background in the environment sector. And as I come from the very social science and that area, I thought maybe it would be a challenge. But I have to admit that, like I was mentioning, it's very positive response, and people really want to learn. But the challenge is that sometimes we as gender experts, advisors, we need to also understand the complexity, and that our language sometimes can be quite theoretical and abstract. We need to take it down to a level that makes sense, which is the same for me when I'm trying to get into the very technical aspects of climate change. So to build capacity and to raise awareness, it's really about going through it with your colleagues and discussing it and making it relate to the work. And with these experiences I've shared, I think it becomes more obvious to the colleagues within UNEP, and it makes sense to do it, especially again in the case of Myanmar, where it was so obvious that there was differences in terms of men and women's experience of climate change. So if we don't take that into account, we cannot plan good intervention and plan good support for the communities. So that was a really good example of also raising the awareness for the colleagues to see how important it is. Yeah, gender disaggregated indicators. Yes, there's many. That might be something to share with you on a different. I think what we need to look at is not only participation and numbers of men and women, but look at land ownership. I'm really interested to develop this more in terms of also, as we're discussing the SDGs, because there is a bit of limitations when it comes to the SDG. So there is a lot of good examples. I think this one I can Margarita specifically. And then question from Lily. Monitor and evaluation challenges. Yeah, it's also about indicators. Challenges, but I still think this option, or we have not worked with this enough. As I'm saying, I think if you bring on a good M&E expert who can specific project do we want to have sex disaggregation of, I think, and outline that from the very start, I don't think it should be that much of a challenge. But again, maybe I should share more of the examples we have developed on good indicators. Okay, Rocio, thank you for the clarification here. Technical assistance on local level for mainstreaming gender approach. I'm sure that maybe we're going to hear more of that for the other speakers, which I'm realizing I'm taking much time here. But there's a lot of NGOs. If we're looking at gender and climate change, a lot has happened in the past years. There's many women's organizations, many gender organizations, civil society organizations that look at the specific linkages between gender and climate change. Before it was more on maybe gender and development, but now we see more and more, of course, that climate change has different impacts of men and women. So more and more local organizations work with this. So I'm sure there's much support that and technical assistance that can be taken from your region as well. We have many of those organizations here in Asia Pacific that we work together with. Okay, so maybe now I captured a bit of the questions. I'm sorry if the translation, if I've been talking too fast. And again, what I want to end with is that you're very welcome to contact me and ask more questions. And I also know that my colleagues at UN Environment in your region is also doing good work on this from the UN Environment side. But feel free to ask more questions to me.
Thank you very much, Annette. Thank you for answering the questions. They were very interesting. And of course, we're going to share with other presenters and with other participants. If you have more questions, you can contact the presenters individually. I'd like now to present Dr. Margarita Caso. Is the Director of Vulnerability and Ecological Adaptation in the National Institute of Climate Change in Mexico, and also her colleague Patricia Arenar, expert in gender. They are going to tell us a little bit more about their experiences in Gulf of Mexico and how they incorporated the gender approach in their. I'd like to thank Margarita if she can start, and if you can tell us a little bit about your experience. First of all, before the presentation, please. Thank you. Can you hear me? Good morning from Mexico City. I'm very pleased to be here today. We're going to have this presentation shared with Patricia Arenar, and I will present this. I'd like to start. I know that we don't have enough time. I'm going to talk about the specific project. in this presentation, let me tell you how we included the gender approach in a project which core was adaptation to climate change. This project ended in October, 3 years, and it's about an initiative about cooperation, international cooperation. The Environment Global Fund gave a donation to design and implement adaptation measures to climate change. And for us was a challenge how to include this gender approach in this project. In Mexico, we have done a lot of emphasis on the importance, how to include the gender in climate change. All the legal instruments in Mexico, climate change legal rules, national climate change background, all this referred to the gender approach, and other international commitments were also here involved, and they are also included in the adaptation of climate change. So in this project, we worked in 3 wetlands in Mexico, Gulf of Mexico, in Veracruz, in Carmen Pajonal Machona, and Humedal de Punta Allen. Each of these wetlands have specific characteristics on climate change. For example, the most important characteristic in Veracruz is that it is strongly contaminated, highly contaminated place by activities that were made in the place as inside. And there are also other activities that were found, fishermen, agricultural staff, and farmers, and these wetlands have a lot of interest in many sectors. The second place in Tabasco, that was the Carmen Pajonal Machona area. The main problem here is that there are people, very poor communities, that have there are a lot of floods that will be aggravated by climate change, because it's a place that it's flooding. Not only the sea level, but the place itself is flooding. And then we have the Humedal de Punta Ale in Quintana Roo. In this place, we have the Mesoamerican Reef System. That is the second coral reef, the second most important coral reef, and has been affected by the high temperatures. We have done adaptation and implementation measures to try to approach the vulnerabilities in this place. I'm sorry, I'm skipping some slides. As I told you, in this project, the main approach was about adaptation based on ecosystems, and also we try to approach communities. We cannot forget that if we are based on ecosystems, it is about biodiversity, but it is also directed to help communities so they can approach climate change. These classical approaches that are communities-based adaptation and risk reduction-based adaptations, with the aim of maintaining a gender approach at all times. This has to do with the national commitments that it's in the national legislation, with the international commitments that have been done in INDC. In each conference of parties in the COP21, they have also were trying to include this gender approach. I'm not going to mention the measurements that were implemented in each of the places, but to have an idea of what measures we have been working on, I'll tell you some of them. We have been working on ecological arrangements with CC approach. This was done for the first time in Mexico. We didn't do it in the past. We installed some monitoring equipment as tide gauges and multiparametric probes. We also worked on the restoration of ecosystems, reforestation of mangroves, and riparian vegetation. We also worked on the dissolve of channels, restoration of water flow, and repopulation of corals. We started the installing of early warning systems, antennas and radios, with the idea of them working in the case of floods, hurricanes, or sanitary emergencies. We also installed and built these buildings that we have on the left. In Mexico we call it palajitos, and they are buildings, high buildings with stilts to protect properties of communities in case of floods. This was done as a measure, demonstration measure for population, for the communities. And we also worked on with the communities with the capacity demonstration. In the case of the social participation, this was the basis of the project. We worked on the dissemination of definition of project objectives, of what it is was going to provide to deliver. We worked on the diffusion and awareness of concepts associated with climate change. In these communities, when we arrived, they didn't know what climate change was. Some of them heard of it, and they didn't know what adaptation was, vulnerability, risk. So it was very important for us to talk about this, to tell them, to explain the concepts, and they started using these words. We also worked on the idea of identification, what the problem were, identification of the problems, what were the vulnerabilities associated or related to climate change. And we wanted them to have a proposal for adaptation measures for the problems they encountered. We also worked on training and the management of equipment and eco-technologies in the place. And we also worked on the communities, with the communities, on formation of committees and creation of micro-enterprises. And ecological planning workshops, participatory evaluations for each project, simulations, protocols, and development of community risk maps. And all these actions were guided by the capacity of communities based on these wetlands. Well, we realized that adaptation measures had to do with vulnerability and climate change, and in that sense there had to be a reduction or sensibility of the system, or increasing the adaptation capacity in the communities. And for this, it was very important for us to identify and to work having clear differences between men and women, and involving women in each of the stages of this project. Empower them and give them the spaces for giving their opinions, and in each stage being aware of encounter men and women in each project. I'm skipping this slide because of the time, and then I'm going to pass Patricia. Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today in this conversation, this presentation, this ideas exchange. It is very important for us, gender approach. I don't know if you can hear me well. Can you hear me? I think you haven't changed to Patricia. Hi. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for giving me the chance of exchanging ideas in the matters of gender approach. We have done a lot of work at an institutional level. The first slide is about it has been a challenge to include gender in our projects because it wasn't as simple as putting women in a project and to use the word woman or women in a project. We have worked on the social participation, and that's why I'd like to highlight that in an adaptation project it is not only about a training course here or another training course and creating expectations in communities, but to have a measurement, technical measure, not as telling them what to do, and because that is failure. A key idea in this project was to recruit specialists, gender specialists, experts that had a lot of experience in the field, and this was very important for the project success. Another thing that was important was the social participation, what kind of social participation we were going to have, and that's why we had communities in action, and this was very important for this measure, and this was a challenge of how to have these action communities. For the question that you asked, the first thing we did in the communities was to understand the women and women problems in their context, and with wetlands we did it in workshops, participatory workshops, and with the topics vulnerability with a gender approach with other consultant teams, and what kind of links women and men had regarding wetlands in the areas of fisher and farm, because there were many women accompanying this productive process. We also established the idea of what they were obtaining from these wetlands, men and women, and women have a different context, and men too. And there were some problems in the case of the land, who owned the land. Some of them occupied the land, and this was a problem, so they didn't have any documentation, legal documentation for these lands, and they didn't have any access for grants of the government. And we asked them who were working on ecosystems, why they wanted to participate in this project, and why they were interested in preserving it. And these were some of the key questions alongside the project, a 2-year project, and allowed us to evaluate the growing of people in preserving natural ecosystems. We also try to create learning environments for women and men trying to tell or say their problems regarding access and preserving natural resources and to create solutions all together. Margarita has mentioned that we wanted to give them voice, give the community some voice, because we have been working in these communities. They're very shy. They don't know how to express their ideas, and this was very important in the project, because in 2 years they can speak, they tell what they want, they smile, they say yes or no. In other communities where they can say yes or no, it's very difficult. Communities in action meant strengthening social participation that was active in decision making, in planning, executing, and assessing the project. Taking into account that small actions in a local level create huge changes, and this is very important because in this way we know what is happening in these small places, and to develop the capacities and new abilities from education, training, organization, and above all, creating new leadership. Next one. What do we mean by communities in action? They are communities that are able to transform, change, influence reality, and make concrete changes in habits, culture, and organizational capacity. And above all, in climate change, their adaptation capacity, having tools to confront today and tomorrow. This was very clear. It was to boost the protagonism of communities and to understand that communities were subject of their own destiny. If they wanted to participate, that was good, and if they didn't want to do it, it was okay too. So we wanted to work with the people who really wanted to participate and were interested in this. Another thing we did was to empower communities, increasing their capacities, abilities, and above all, their management power. Communities we're working on are advancing and creating their own credit organizations, so they get their own grants, because some of the communities we're working on, they were not experienced in administrative experience and management experience, and they didn't know how to obtain credits, and there was very low knowledge on community organization. And this didn't happen with the religions. It was a different thing. This triggered processes of change, of reconstruction and construction of social relationship and power. And leadership implied distribution of power in communities. Why do we bet on effective social participation? We think that this allows change and allows developing and share identity and response. If you see the picture on the right, it's voting. We did in the school where we installed water capturing a system where women could speak, could vote, so the adaptation measures were accepted, and they participated in all the process from cleaning the land, cleaning the place, started with the building of the place where they were going to stay, and nowadays operating a complex plant in a technical level of water purification and rebuilding the social net, the trust among people, being in this place in a system manner to approach the problem with adaptation ideas. Let's say 80% of illiteracy in this place was a problem, utilities, limitations, and in this way we were able to create solutions. They wanted to help and they wanted to solve the problems. In communities where there is not a social network that is not created by institutions, they should strengthen social network with trust. That was important for gaining credibility in this project. In communities in action, when we work, when people question, when people propose, this creates autonomy and self-organization, and this allowed us to structure and support adaptation measures in the project. Success factors consider the problems, the common problems of community members, focus on collective learning as a key factor for sustaining motivation of communities, create knowledge that communities can select what women or men, what kind of plant they were going to use in their community. So women told us that they were kind of trees in the sense of plants, what kind of trees or plants they needed for specific seasons. So the idea was to understand, to listen to the needs, the different needs they had, to have collective learning and to generate new skills, learning, empowerment, and leadership. And as you can see, women are in charge of the water plant. They learn how to create a company, how to combine chemical components so water was purified. And one of them, who was illiterate, was able to, through this process, to have a list of things that were happening, to have a diary, a technical diary. With each team, we had 15 consultant teams in the field, and there were problems in some cases with the community. Being in the field, monitoring the project allowed us to, as external agents, to focus on the specific conflicts. As Margarita mentioned, in communities where there wasn't any structure, any community structure, we were able to establish a water committee and a committee of palacitos. And in the assessment we did, we saw a high involvement of communities, and what I said, social awareness as well.
Communities own key knowledges. They got involved further that are just a payment, and today these communities are trying to replicate some of the measures, individual measures. They are being organized as groups, cooperatives, in order to take governmental resources, and they are suggesting some other work options for maintaining these measures. This project says that measures of less investment and low impact are fundamental as adaptation measures, and also it is fundamental to develop diagnosis of a social vulnerability as a baseline. Lessons learned. We have many lessons learned. You have the presentation, and basically what we would like to say is that having seen the social action as a priority to let them act was the actual key of the project. As conclusions, the wetland project that included preservation and a structure that exists in Mexico, considering there is a provision of the cutting of mangrove. There is an organization called Unities of Management for Flora that allows them to have a sustainable take a sustainable advantage of the mangrove. So we did this with the training of these units, management units, where we have women, and with other unity formed only by men, and we exchange experiences. So the wetland project is a great example of a great design, a good consultant team, among other things, and that is seen through resources, good use resources, and communities that own and adopt the adaptation measures. The motto of new times, new actions. Let's adapt. There is a motto that calls for action. We have to adapt, and that is a job that we do with men and women. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Margarita, for that great presentation. With your presentation, with your mangrove project, and how it included the gender approach. We have 10 minutes, and I invite all participants, please, to write your questions in the chat, and we will have 10 minutes for a brief discussion. Thank you. I give the floor to Margarita, and if necessary, Patricia also. You just let me know who wants to answer the question. Thank you. This is me, Margarita. Yes. Regarding the question, Lily's questions about if that methodology to include the gender approach can be duplicated in other contexts, for example, ecosystems of mountain ecosystems, yes, we believe so. We believe that we can replicate this in mountain ecosystems. We just finished the project, as we mentioned, and we have the task of make a system of this, the details of the project. And I mean, what do I mean by that? What do we need to duplicate? We believe that the work done with the people on gender approach, we can duplicate this, yes, but we need a time in order to duplicate, to make a system of this methodology. I don't know if Patricia would like to add something, would like to complement something. Oh, I'm sorry, but you need... Yes. 2 lessons learned of the project is, first, there needs to be availability of the communication in order to make a change. And in second place, there has to be leaders. We go to communities where there is not the case. So it is quite important to detect this by prior meetings, the placement, the location of leaders, of future leaders, and the community should want to do this, to start this process. I would like to add something to what Patricia said, in this project there was women participation. We had a group of 5 women. It was not the objective, but it was the case, and that allowed us to create trust relations with women of the communities that we visited. Relations that were established, relationships that were established not quickly. It was not easy. We established those relationships throughout a lot of time, thanks to workshops, meetings, approaches, and something that I want to share with you is that this participation of the women group by IMEC, by the National Institute of Climate Change, could have been an important factor in order to gain the trust of the groups of women of the communities. Thank you. Regarding the question that is it possible to measure the change of communities through intervention, yes. Those are the things that we have to work on right now, but there is a process that included a survey of start of test, the base survey of the test, and then a final survey where we included those disaggregated indicators of gender. That means that we have to analyze carefully the results of the surveys, but yes, they were designed to identify changes in communities regarding gender equality, the empowerment of women. It was the objective of the survey. I don't know if Patricia would like to add something. What I want to add is that the great majority, as Margarita mentioned, the external consultants were women, and that allowed some sort of the base of the model that they had, of being the women had of being women, and that is explained, that is showed by simple commentaries where they saw us, they saw the women driving trucks in a risk situation, because in the communities where we work, there were communities with a strong impact of narco traffic, of drug trafficking, stealing things. So seeing the independence of the consultants that arrived there to the communities, that was an important factor regarding the change of identity, how we could be a woman in a different way. Well, that was good, because we were not only external consultants, but in a way we were some sort of an ear that support them in different topics that worry them, like menopause, for example. In a way, they mentioned that they went to training, yes, but as a psychologist, in order to see what was going on with them. But it was a really good experience and life-changing experience. Another question regarding the participation, differentiate participation to make the difference of the pollution of the wetland. Yes, we identified that the differentiated participation is important in terms of helping this pollution contamination problem. Solving, it goes further that actually the project, because as we mentioned, it was quite large wetlands, and as we mentioned, the pollution comes not only from problems in the wetland, but problems that are external to it. But we also worked with communities in terms of this pollution of the wetland, yes. And as we mentioned, of course, we identified the roles of women and men regarding pollution that they were producing. We we're also working with the communities regarding the trash problem. So it is different. The trash generated at home, at the households, carried out by, leadered by women, than the trash produced by men in the economic activities is different. The trash from fishermen than the trash generated from households, and it's different. The treatment is different, of course. For those types of trash, is different in terms of gender. There is other question also that we can facilitate the document regarding the experience. Yes, of course. When we will start with the systematization of the experience. When we finish, we will share it. We finished the project, and we will work on that, on the document. And on the other hand, this information regarding the project will be included in the sixth national community of Mexico, and we will work on that. Yes, of course, it will be shared. I don't know if Patricia would like to complement, to add something. Yes, regarding the trash, as for the preservation of the wetland, was worked with young men, women, and children. And that was important because we worked environmental education through games. We carried out two paint walls that shows the water cycle that was painted by the community, mothers, children, etc. And they painted this, and for them it's something, it's their pride and joy. It's a great pride because they felt that they did it. And in the games part, there was not present in the communities, so it was quite interesting, was nice. And there was another paint wall regarding the environmental services given by the river, and every time the fishermen they go, they see it, and the whole community participated in that. As for trash, this is being worked at schools by children and by women of the community, because we have to mention that there are communities there's not a lot of transportation to get there, where the radio communication services, there's almost none, there's non-existent. So it's a really strong change to think to get the pet and then sell it. So, but they are aware that they are changing the whole preservation awareness. There is a question here that says, how can we measure the gender equality and change in communities from this intervention? As a key point for us was, as an indicator, was the emergence of new leaders and the recognition of them by the community. Other topic was the research of the different options of women, for example, to have a profitable work, not being the one that works with the shelves. For example, the women work with the shelves, but making regional foods for selling. And that is another indicator that the access to work is really important for them, is really looked for by these women. And we are elaborating other indicators, like, for example, the necessity of literacy for adults, considering the high illiteracy level that was lived by the community had. There is a question regarding the family on the actions of gender, and And a key point is that we work strongly in two communities. One, with the presence of different regions, we didn't cause great impacts of alcoholism, but when we worked, that was when we installed the rainwater collection system. It was in charge of women, and we saw this, and that affected on alcoholism, and a lot of women were in charge of the household, and what we worked on was activities to carry out activities that strengthen the relations, the bonds in the family, and to which where the families could have some sort of relief in the day-to-day life. And that was important not only because there was a group that was operated or was trained to do it, but that the share of bottled water that was not a culture in the region decreased the gastrointestinal diseases, and that helped in the economy of the families, and the research of the resource, whether on the river, and the economic part that was to buy water from a truck that became really expensive. At the cultural level also was important. People didn't know that the rainwater could be processed and to be drinking. So due to the service of water in their homes, at their households. Thank you very much, Margarita and Patricia. Thank you for the participants for the interesting questions. If there was a question that was not answered, we will give the questions for the presenters, because we have to continue with the next presentation of Patricia Carrillo. Thank you very much, Margarita and Patricia. I'm sorry for taking your time. I would like to introduce Patricia. Patricia is a lawyer by graduate from the National University of San Marcos with studies and specialization in the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru. Since 1985, she has worked in feminist and human rights NGOs in the capacity building and the promotion of women's rights. In February 2002, Patricia held the position of Director of Promotion of Women and Ministry of Promotion of Women and Human Development. And in 2012, until August 2016, she joined the Ministry of Women and Vulnerable Populations as a General Director of Mainstreaming Gender approach of Ministry of Women. So I give you the floor, Patricia.
No escucho nada. Please, some seconds to having some technical issues here. The interpreter can't hear. The interpreter can't hear the speaker. Can you hear me? The interpreter can't hear. Well, good morning. For the fourth time, overcoming these technical issues, I will introduce the process of elaboration of the Plan Action on Gender and Climate Change of Peru. I'll try to respect the time I have. The first thing I'd like to share with you is that the previous idea of this climate change on gender that was approved in COP20 December 2014 here in Lima, Peru, by the member states had to include the gender in climate change. And based on this commitment, Peruvian state announced its commitment to develop a plan of action on gender and climate change. This happened in December 2013, and the elaboration process took us about a year, and finally it was passed in July this year, 2017. What were the conditions that were conducive to climate action with a gender perspective in our country? One first thing I'd like to highlight is that we understand, first of all, the climate action is not exclusive of the Ministry of Environment or gender. Equality is not about gender itself, but we always said that, in fact, it is also said nowadays, gender is competence of Ministry of Women. That doesn't mean exclusivity, because gender equality has to do with the state and civil society and other agencies or entities that are operating in our territory, as international cooperation, women organizations, other organizations and unions, etc. And from the point that these ideas as gender equality are not exclusive of sectors that are only related to policies of gender equality, we had this commitment of the ministry, the Environment Ministry and the Women Ministry as well. Apart from that, another condition that was favorable is that we had other management tools of public policies that recognize the relation between gender and climate change. In Peru, the national strategy on climate change recognizes that it is important to advance in gender equality and states that as one of the approaches is gender equality. In the same way, national plan of gender equality that we have in Peru recognizes and has as one of its strategies value the contribution of women in natural resources. And this value recognition of women contribution regarding natural resources constitutes the eighth aim in this national plan in gender equality, and was the starting point in linking climate change and gender equality. finally, we have other organs, governing bodies in the structure of both ministries, General Direction of Climate Change and General Direction of Incorporation Gender Approach, that help us to have this technical linkage. The Environment Ministry has and in the in Women Ministry we also have the same commitments. We are committed to implementation of policies and gender equality as well. Implementing this with capacities development constituted a challenge in the process, as I will be telling you later. I'm sorry, my previous slide. So what does the incorporation of gender approach into an action plan to address climate change mean? And here, the first challenge for us in public sector in Peru was mainly for the Women Ministry to work on this plan, not only with the Environment Ministry, but with other sectors in Peru, at the subnational level in Peru, to recognize the gender inequality in society exists and it should be reverted. And this has to do with the gender inequality is not only a competence of one ministry, but to a responsibility for all the Peruvian state. Why? Because it is important to revise how climate change deepens inequality, gender inequalities. This also meant in the process, as it has been referred in other previous presentations, a process of awareness and sensibilization by which it was recognized that women and men are different, but that this difference should not mean inequality. So public policies will not eliminate differences, but inequality is produced from these relationships in gender that are domination relationships that have been affecting women. This allowed us in this process to understand how men lose in this inequality idea, and this lose is not seen as a result of inequality. And obviously, approaching this gender issue and to promote the policies to revert gender inequality from conditions for women and men to access natural resources, productive resources, financial support, and to have the same decision-making power over issues that affect their livelihoods. We know that women and men don't have the same possibilities of, let's say, own land. Only 4% of women own land. However, they produce more than 60% of food for human consumption. These kind of inequalities must be evidenced in the implementation process and have been identified as fundamental elements in the plan, as I will be telling you in the climate change implementation, is looking for measurements to contribute the impact of climate change in the people's life, but to incorporate these elements in adaptation and implementation and to reduce gender inequality as a result of climate policies. Here I have a process timeline. I can see it on my screen. I can see it full. I hope you have the the slide, the complete slide. I'm having some problems with some technical problems. I can't see the slide very well, the whole diagram. But I'd like to present or tell you that this decision was made in December 2014, and in 2015 we created this action plan on climate change, gender and climate change. We started with a draft that had to do with the context on gender and climate change, where a consultant company of IUCN helped us to identify something that we in the women ministry we were thinking about, that there isn't relationship between climate change and gender. Measurements, mitigation and adaptation measurements were not considering gender approach or inequalities between women and men. With this document, on one side we had an inventory of the policies and regulations with a gender approach. We also had, with this document, we started a strengthening workshop in capacities on gender, climate and gender, with the people who were going to participate in this process. This workshop and then the other workshop elaboration of the PAGCC were very they participated a lot, with a lot of effort, with the cooperation, with the support of the international cooperation, with these officers from the state, from the government, civil society, people, ecological organizations, trade unions, farmers, women organizations, Indian organizations. And then after creating this action plan, we started to work on other macro-regional workshops. After this, we created a document that was part of a result of a lot of work with the specialists and sectors with competencies in prioritized areas: forests, hydrical resources, solid resources, risk management, health. There are two more. Let's see. Did I say water resources? If I remember, I'll let you know. There were many prioritized areas. Then we made a public consultation at the national level in Lima, and finally in 2016 we had this final review incorporating all these contributions from public consultation and final meetings we had with other specialists and experts. And in April this year we had the final version that was discussed in the Council of Ministries and passed by Supreme Decree at the end of July this year. And this is important because the fact this has been passed by a Council of Ministry, of course we had to negotiate, and it was a political thing. This presence or absence of information differentiated by sex in the diagnosis and analysis of problems on which the Peruvian state intervenes, information about the presence of women and many productive activities covered by the revised policies, and the degree of participation of women and men in the design of policies and the implementation of actions. Something very important, this document that we try to propose, the alternative for a climate change and gender, is to incorporate knowledge and practice of women and indigenous peoples. So I'll continue. The process, as I told you, was a year process. These 3 workshops, strengthening capacities, working on the document itself, and validation workshops, where we tried to respond to increase knowledge in key factors on climate change so they could participate in an informed manner. And this was a meeting space that is normally not possible among these kind of sectors or organizations, and constituted adjustment space with the contribution of all these representatives. For many of us who participated, has been a participatory and transparent process, maybe the most participatory process for creating an instrument of public involvement, and this was not possible if we didn't have the participation of the will and all the people, these actors who participate in the whole process. What are the learned lessons and the most important challenges we faced? One of the first lessons learned that was a key lesson is to establish a relationship between climate change and gender inequality for officials and representatives of social organizations, so they could understand the need and importance of formulating an action plan that could reverse inequality in the framework of adapting and mitigating the effects of climate change. In a previous presentation, you were talking about gender language was too technical, and this was the challenge, the main challenge, to approach participants in civil society and to tell them clear concepts and appropriate regarding climate change and gender and the relation that there is between gender and climate change and how climate change deepens gender inequality. In the same way, another lesson learned focuses on participation that allowed us to articulate interests, contributions and commitments of all the involved sectors, public sector, civil society, indigenous organizations, women organizations, in the implementation of all these topics. All this implies commitments that were discussed and approved by each of the actors and participants. Another learned lesson is that the contributions from men are more visible and have more recognized value socially, and this is why we were very careful on identifying and valuing contribution of women as well. As the aims in Peru, we can formulate public policies and management instruments such as an action plan on gender and climate change without also considering the intercultural approach.
We have to consider Ministry of Culture, and we have to integrate all the ministries into our policies. Our action plan has a set of integrated and multi-sectoral actions built collectively, and as I mentioned, with such implementation was included with all the participant agents. The areas where we can see these priorities that were implemented have to do with forests, water resources, food security, energy, that was something that I forgot, solid waste, education, health, and welfare and risk management. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, I am here. Thank you very much, Patricia, for your presentation for the action plan. It was quite complex regarding the action of Latin America, and now we have some minutes for questions. Please write your questions on the chat. Thank you. Patricia, you have the floor. I have a question regarding the next steps. We have a concern during the process is that after such an intense work during a year and then the after part of the political part, that policy took us 4 months, and then the incidents for the approval of the plan, we had a change in government in July. Finishing the prior government was approved the action plan for gender and climate change and was incorporated a new government. We had a new government that was elected last July. The idea is that we waited some time for the change of some key authorities, and the plan is actually ready for the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Women summon and generate the institutionality of the implementation of the plan. From my point of view, there are two entities that can lead this implementation. As I mentioned, the plan has some responsibilities where all sectors and subnational governments have responsibilities. But we have to generate the institutionality for the implementation of the plan. That is the first challenge. We have the National Commission of Climate Change, and there is also the Multisectoral Commission of Implementation of the Gender Equality Plan. From these two instances, creating a new, I think that it would be the first step to be done to give responsibilities to some mechanisms and some officer at the intermediate level of these sectors that could summon maybe from the National Commission of Climate Change, and that could start to request representatives from all involved sectors in order to carry out the operative plan of implementation for this first year. Something that I did not mention is that this plan is valid until 2021, so we could start by making operation plans in order to start the implementation. We have other question that it says that by Margarita, do we have the opportunity to implement these policies in concrete projects? We have projects that have been developed basically in organizations of the civil society, and in some cases also projects that have been linked to specific interventions of some areas. The main lessons, and I'm going to try to be brief, there is a variety of projects that have to do with protection of seeds, incorporations of women in training processes, women committed to agricultural activities. The main learned lessons have to do with the fact that when we incorporate women and we give them the same opportunities that men have in order to access training and give them, empower them, there is a value generated in the production activity and also in the recuperation of seeds and products. We give more value and potential to activities that have to do with sustainability of life. When women who generally do not have a lot of time because they are overcharged with reproduction activities, and to that overcharge of tasks, we give them a space for them to improve their capacities, their skills. The contribution of women is more visible, and it's empowered even more. And we give a lot more value to productive activities where women participate, and that is something important. And some other thing is the recognition of the women's contributions is that men start to work also in the caring activities, and they recognize the capacities of women, and they incorporate the women, to the activities where male participation is greater. Thank you very much for the questions. Thank you, Patricia, for the explanation. It was a very interesting webinar to learn in more depth how was the planification process and implementation of projects in adaptation-based ecosystems in Mexico, and how it was seen the gender approach in the Asia-Pacific area. And we also had a presentation regarding the planification process of the action plan of gender and climate change. Thank you very much for all participants, all speakers, and we will share the presentations and also the contact information of speakers if you want to contact them, in case you want to contact them. And we are also recording the webinar, and we will send the link so you can share it. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Goodbye.